Welcome back to a new module. This week we will be reading Streetcar Named Desire, Part 1. The Streetcar Named Desire is quite a change from the last text that we've read, Romeo and Juliet. So obviously we continue to see that there is a clear connection in that literature and the theater between desire and suffering. In Romeo and Juliet, we witnessed a tragic death, a death that could have been avoided, right? The death of two people who could have lived happily ever after and definitely were too young to die. In this new play, we're going to be dealing with something different. Obviously, we're dealing with a more contemporary form of desire. Now we're post-World War II and well into the 40s. And Williams is a groundbreaking playwright in many respects. He grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. He starts traveling the world and the United States, left and right, always seeking new places, places usually marked by cultural transformation or cultural movement, right? This is the kind of places where he will find his inspiration for the plays. For this reason, he will often gravitate around big cities such as New York, Los Angeles, obviously, Paris, Havana, the Keys, London, Chicago, Miami. But somehow, Tennessee Williams will find his middle ground in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, to which he constantly returns to find more inspiration for his writings. Maybe it's the cultural makeup and mix-up of the French Quarter. A place like no other in the entire United States for its arts, for its food, for its festivals, culture in general, religious heritage, you name it. That all combined is what made Tennessee Williams find inspiration for most of his plays, and particularly for The Streetcar Named Desire. So A Streetcar Named Desire is probably the most famous play he has ever written, but also it's a play in which he participated after he wrote and he followed its evolution. Elia Kazan, the same man who directed the first versions, the first performances of the play in the theater, worked closely with Tennessee Williams to adapt this unusual narrative to cinema. And it is very plausible, it's very possible that Tennessee Williams was already thinking about a movie when he started writing the plot of a triangular desire surrounded by cultural taboos. And he probably even had some of those actors in mind. Yes, New Orleans is along the lines of Las Vegas, maybe, a city where people pass by to enter a carnival, a festival, and temporarily lose their identity. It is mostly a place of residence where people that live in New Orleans accept the proximity and the promiscuity that is so typical in the center of the city. Blanche Dubois, the sister coming from the rural world, therefore enters a space that is radically different from everything she's ever known. We can pay particular attention to her physical reactions, and that's what I'd like you to do in your reading, because she constantly communicates how she feels physically and emotionally to the other characters. In the city, however, people do not have the tendency to share those emotions and feelings with one another so easily. And that's probably due to the fact that they're faced to a harsher reality. Williams will play with that contrast between the urban and the rural, obviously in this play. Ultimately, it is the city of New Orleans, with its climate, its movements, and its lifestyle, that will trigger the desire of the characters. At least this is the painting that Tennessee Williams was seeking to offer. It is also groundbreaking in the kind of desires that it portrays. Desires that cannot sustain one another, such as the one we see moving between Stanley and Blanche. What might appear rather sensual for today's standards was back then a very daring picture of what a family could look like. In A Streetcar Named Desire, we're dealing with triangular desires. As I've already mentioned, this is a much more complicated kind of desire, when A is attracted to B, that is attracted to C, and so on and so forth. Obviously, this is a very modern depiction. Triangular desires were already depicted in world literature before Streetcar Named Desire, but Tennessee Williams gives it an actual touch of realism, right? There's no princess, there's no super family or political power involved. We're dealing with a very working class environment, which is not so typical of tragedy in the tradition. So please pay attention at how the tensions will build up, and especially how they are parallel to the desire. Characters don't know how to handle their desires. Characters have lived with previous desires they haven't dealt with. Characters are now faced with new desires, given the proximity and the influence of the city.